Website analytics are evolving with the introduction of Google's latest analytics platform, Google Analytics 4, also known as GA4. In this session, CI Analytics Pro Ali Duffy-Kubelet will give us an overview of the GA4 platform and a step-by-step guide to making a plan for your implementation. GA4 is Google's response to an increasingly cookieless world, and it's more critical than ever to set your website up for success in this new digital landscape. There will be no Q&A in this session, but you can reach out to Ali through the conference platform if you'd like to get in touch. And immediately following this session here in the same stream, please join Google's Nick Rama for a brief meditation break. The stage is yours, Ali.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ali Duffy-Kubelet. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with blonde hair, blue glasses, and a matching blue and white striped shirt. I am sitting in front of a beige wall with a lamp to my left and a plant to my right. I'm coming to you from Upper Manhattan, which I'd like to acknowledge is the traditional lands of the Munsee and the Lenape people. Now that you've hopefully been inspired by the last session and how data can help us make better decisions, I hope you're all excited to dig into website analytics and Google Analytics 4. But before we get into that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. For most of my life, I have thought of myself as a dancer since my very first performance at age 3. I came to New York to study dance in college, that's me in the blue, even as I began to realize that dance was not going to be my career and take the steps that would lead me to this particular stage, I started to appreciate even more the lessons of that dance training. One of the things that you learn as a dancer is the importance of technique. These are the fundamentals that keep your body strong and safe while you're moving. You learn that it takes constant practice to develop and maintain that technique, and that the work is never really over. So you may sense that there's a metaphor coming, because what we're talking about today is essentially web analytics technique. Measurement tools like Google Analytics are the foundation for our analysis. It's what makes it possible for us to capture data about our website, which in turn then allows us to move or make decisions from a stronger and more data-driven place. And as in dance, where technique must be maintained as your body changes or you experience injury, our measurement tools must also respond to changes in the digital landscape. And this is really what GA4 is all about. Before we jump into the specifics of GA4, I just wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit about why we care so much about website analytics and website data in the first place. Web analytics is the practice of evaluating site performance, understanding user behavior, and informing future iterations of the website. And it's really critical because our website is one of the primary ways that people will interact with our organization. Google Analytics is our preferred tool for website analytics, both because of its functionality and because it's free. It's used by millions of websites and can provide invaluable data to inform decisions related directly to the website itself, as well as, I think, other areas of your organizational strategy. Just to provide a few examples, Google Analytics can give us a better understanding of how our digital campaigns are performing, whether our landing pages are driving exploration and engagement, whether our content is resonating with our target audience, and whether those audiences are purchasing or maybe they need a little bit more time to consider. Google Analytics can also show us how people are using the site and perhaps where there are points of friction, things that may be confusing for people, where folks may be having difficulty finding the information they need. Then that information can in turn help us prioritize both our time and our investment, right? To iterate in a way that truly improves the user experience and our site performance. And finally, we know that there are always so many competing agendas when it comes to our website. But by analyzing the data captured in Google Analytics, we can respond to the actual needs and interests of our audience in a more real way and balance that more appropriately with the organizational priorities that we may have. I wanted to show just a few examples of the kind of data that's available in Google Analytics and how that data can be used to set priorities and inform decisions. Here we are looking at the site's performance on several key performance indicators broken down by desktop and mobile. And you'll notice that while about half of our traffic is coming from mobile, those sessions have quite a higher bounce rate, which means that those users are more likely to come to the site, view just one page, and then leave. You'll also notice that mobile has a significantly lower conversion rate. If you've been to bootcamp before, you may have seen data very similar to this. It's pretty common to see these kinds of results. And this information can be super valuable in making the case for prioritizing and investing in the mobile site experience and purchase path. Imagine if we could improve that mobile conversion rate just a little bit, the impact that it could have on incremental revenue. In this example, we are looking at the percent of sessions that include a visit to a particular section of the site. And here we can see that there are certain areas of the site that are more highly trafficked than others. We'll talk more specifically about how I was able to do this analysis a little bit later. This information can help create a better understanding of what information users are seeing, what they're seeking out, and can then help us design for really both sides of that coin. So on the one hand, we want to highlight the most popular content and make the wayfinding of that as simple and straightforward as possible for people. On the other hand, we may want to find ways to imbue other important information from the About Us, from the blog, or from the support section in other ways across sections of the site. Since we can see from this data, people aren't finding their way to those sections on their own. Just one more example before we get into GA4. Here we can see scroll depth on the home page, where on desktop, about 70% of users scroll 25% down the page. And then there's quite a big drop off where only 40% make it halfway down the page. And we can see that's even more extreme on mobile, where it takes a lot more scrolling, right? You have to swipe a lot to get 25% down. And so only 47% of people are getting that far. And this information can help inform a conversation about content hierarchy, for example. Knowing that people will only see the first couple of modules, perhaps, we can prioritize content in a way that finds the intersection of what people were looking for, the information that we had from that last data that I showed, what people are looking for, and our organizational priorities, the things that we want to surface for them. So now that we're all on the same page about how website data can be activated, let's get into the real meat of things and talk about the latest version of Google Analytics, or GA4. So we're going to spend the rest of the time really on the what, the why, and the how of GA4. What it is, why it's being released now, and why you should look to start taking advantage of it. And then we'll talk about how your organization can actually get started with that. We'll talk about some of the aspects of the implementation that's going to be a bit technical, what GA4 offers in terms of reporting and dashboards, and then how to start thinking about moving your analytics practice to this new version of the platform. So let's get into it. GA4 launched in beta in 2018, and it was officially rolled out last October in 2020. If you're using Google Analytics right now, good chance is you're using a version called Universal Analytics, and I'll just call it Universal going forward. That was released in 2012, so in terms of technology, it's kind of a dinosaur, and it's been in need of updating for quite a while. And the reason for that is because the internet is just a different place than it was almost 10 years ago. In addition to our traditional websites and web pages, there are more apps and what we call single page applications, which have historically required a different measurement solution. GA4 is designed to unify measurement across these various digital experiences, and in doing so, provide a more complete picture of user behavior across the various platforms your organization may have. You've also likely heard of all of the commotion around cookies and the restrictions put in place by both browsers and governments to protect user behavior or protect user privacy rather, and limit the use of cookies across the web. Some of the functionality of universal analytics has historically depended on cookies. And so with GA4, Google is preparing for a cookieless future by building in additional machine learning that will fill in the gaps where we don't have permission from the user to track their behavior. Essentially, GA4 is letting us piggyback on the power of Google's algorithms, which I think we all know are known to be best in class. The GA4 infrastructure includes several upgrades to its analytics infrastructure. First of these is that GA4 attempts to provide better measurement of user behavior across devices. It does this by first incorporating actual user data where possible. If I'm a user and I am logged into my Google account on my mobile device and on my desktop, and I'm visiting your site in both places, if I have also allowed for ad personalization in my Google account, Google can then connect the dots between those two visits and connect me as a user. Sometimes that's not going to be possible, right? Some people don't have ad personalization enabled. And this is where Google steps in and incorporates some machine learning to model the remainder of that user behavior. Second, GA4 integrates with Google's cloud data warehousing platform called BigQuery. This was previously a feature only available in the premium version of Google Analytics, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. And now any GA4 account can be easily linked to BigQuery. What this allows you to do is to store your data, and it also allows you to conduct more granular analysis using the programming language SQL or SQL. This is an exciting development, but it's definitely one that requires a bit more technical know-how. Next, GA4 can be more easily configured to track additional engagements out of the box. Previously, Universal Analytics would track page views and e-commerce fairly easily. And I caveat that just because e-commerce tracking does sometimes require some additional steps. But anything beyond those two things would definitely have required additional configuration. Now GA4 will also automatically capture interacting with embedded YouTube videos, scrolling, clicking an outbound link, downloading files, and internal searches with just kind of a checkbox. So with that, we have more data about user behavior out of the box. And finally, that machine learning piece that I mentioned in cross-device tracking extends beyond cross-device. GA4 also offers predictive audiences and metrics. So that can look like revenue projections or pools of users that Google has deemed most likely to convert that you can then use in your ad campaigns, for example. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Google announced a pretty exciting rollout of advanced attribution modeling in GA4. So while Universal Analytics uses last click attribution by default, GA4 will use data-driven attribution. This is a huge difference and should give us a much more accurate and nuanced understanding of how our different channels and campaigns are performing. And I'll put a couple links in the chat where you can learn more about Google's point of view on machine learning and the new data-driven attribution model, because we don't have enough time to get into the details of those things today. All of these changes together mean potentially better and stronger analytics technique, richer data, more powerful insights fueled by Google's algorithm. That said, getting started with GA4 will be challenging for a few reasons. The first challenge is really just a learning curve that everyone using GA4 will experience together. GA4 is a totally different data model, and there are some different data definitions that go along with that. So here's a sample visualization of the difference in data model. And what I mean by that is really just the way that the structure of the data that you are sending to Google Analytics. So with Universal Analytics, there were 3 types of interactions: viewing a page on the site, transacting, and a custom event, i.e. any other kind of engagement we wanted to measure. And different data was sent along with each of those different interactions. In GA4, everything is an event. You have a page view event, you have a purchase event, you have a scroll event. And the data sent along with each event follows the same structure. So as a result, it's super customizable. And that may sound kind of technical, and it definitely can be. With GA4, Google is giving us the opportunity to customize a lot, both in how we capture the data and how we analyze it. But taking full advantage of that will often require more technical expertise, and in some instances, a bit of code. The programming language that I'm typically referring to when I say code from now going forward is JavaScript. So GA4 has a different data model, some new data definitions, and it will require a new implementation that is a bit more technical and code heavy. Relatedly, the settings and filters available in the admin interface of GA4 are much more limited than they were in Universal. If you're familiar with Universal, you may know that you could create different views to narrow in on data for particular stakeholders. I think a good example of this is maybe data on your shop, and you want just your shop people to be able to access that on its own. You could also add lots of different custom filters to transform your data directly within Google Analytics interface. This could include things like adjusting your default channel groupings to make sure your campaign sources were attributed to the correct channel. One of our favorite features was categorizing page traffic into content groupings, which is what allowed me to do the analysis I shared earlier on popular site sections. Or even just some simple cleanup like removing unnecessary query strings from URLs. All of those kinds of things you could do within the Google Analytics interface. Unfortunately, none of that functionality is available in GA4. So we either need to use some code to adjust our data before sending it to GA4, or we need to rely more on tools like Google Data Studio, where we can make the adjustments we need after the fact. Finally, the reporting interface is pretty minimal in GA4. If you're familiar with Universal, you know there are lots and lots of reports available there out of the box. GA4 is the exact opposite. Google is really encouraging you to make those reports and visualizations that are meaningful to you and your organization, and giving us the tools to customize that, which is both great and kind of annoying because it's more work for me. Real talk, and I'm not alone in this opinion, I think that Google has a lot of work to do to make the GA4 interface more user-friendly, which, if you think about it, is sort of ironic for a tool that we are meant to use to improve our user experience. So you may be wondering, why should we even bother? And I would argue that the challenges are worth overcoming because GA4 really couples better data, meaning a more unified view of user behavior across digital experiences with more powerful tools like machine learning and predictive modeling. Our websites deserve that more powerful analysis because they are more important than ever, particularly with the last year, almost 2 years that we've had. We know that we need to continue to provide meaningful digital experiences for our audiences. Website analytics helps us do just that. Like I said at the beginning, we want to make sure our technique isn't slacking and that we have the tools to respond to the changing digital landscape. But also we should do it because Google has made it very clear they are not going to be investing in universal analytics going forward. So let's get into making your plan. We're recommending that you start by configuring your GA4 measurement and running that in parallel to your existing universal analytics to kind of ease into that transition. I just want to acknowledge that there are folks out there who maybe don't have universal analytics implemented already. And in that case, many of these differences and many of my personal gripes won't be as stark for you and won't be as bothersome. So just a nod to all of y'all who can start fresh with web analytics, with your web analytics journey with GA4. But for the purposes of this example, we'll consider a case where you do have universal currently. So in that case, our recommended adoption timeline would look something like this. So here you are right now, only using universal analytics. Phase 1 would be sometime in the next 6 months. You'll get a basic GA4 setup in place. And when I say basic, what I mean by that is getting page view data, enabling those built-in automatic events, capturing e-commerce purchase data, and making sure you're not capturing any personally identifiable information. We'll talk more about those pieces soon. It's important to note that GA4 begins capturing data from the moment it's implemented going forward. There isn't a way to migrate any existing historical data into the new GA4 data model. So Universal Analytics is really going to be around for a while because it will be where all of your historical data lives. But because of that, the sooner you get started in GA4, the sooner you'll have more apples to apples historical data in GA4 itself to use in your analysis. So that's really the source of some of this urgency. Phase 1 is where you start building that new data set. You familiarize yourself with the GA4 interface and those data definitions, and you start to think about what additional customization would be valuable to your organization. If you're the primary analytics point person at your organization, you probably aren't sharing access to GA4 more broadly, and you probably aren't reporting out on any of those GA4 metrics. It's really about giving yourself the time to become more comfortable with the platform. Phase 2 is probably sometime in the next year or so. This is where you'll start to make the shift to using GA4 as your primary data source, while still having that safety net of Universal in the background. For this phase, we absolutely recommend going beyond the basic setup and those automated events and being intentional about the data that you want to collect, setting up the more advanced e-commerce tracking, building some custom events to measure different behavior, and maybe setting up content groupings. This is where you'll start maybe sharing access to GA4 with colleagues and reporting out on some of that data. And I'll touch on all of those things and details on that shortly. Realistically, phase 3 probably isn't for a few years, a couple of years, but here we've reached the point where GA4 is our primary platform. We're familiar with the data in the interface. We don't need that backup of Universal anymore, and we can remove those tags from our site. But we won't ever delete our Universal Analytics property fully because, as I mentioned, that's where all of our historical data will live. We'll just remove those Universal tags to stop capturing new data in that property. Overall, this timeline is definitely not prescriptive. I know there are many things that go into determining what the right time will be for your organization to tackle this project. So that said, let's zoom in a bit on some of the things you'll need to get started with phase 1. First up, just the very basics of starting to capture data. There are 2 ways to place GA4 tracking on your site. The first is with a global site tag, which is code placed directly on your site, or through Google Tag Manager. And the latter is really our preferred method for tracking all kinds of things. I think it's more accessible, it's more transparent, and I think it's slightly easier than working with a developer to place code every time you need to track something different. If you're new to GTM, that's one of the platforms my colleagues are reviewing in the other session happening right now. So I definitely encourage you to go back and check that out. In brief, though, Google Tag Manager is a platform for managing all of your tracking tags without needing to edit the code of your site, as I mentioned, every time you want to track a different kind of interaction or send data to a different marketing platform. So again, we think Tag Manager is the best way to implement GA4, but you will need to be a pretty advanced user of GTM, especially when it comes to taking advantage of some of the more advanced customizations possible with GA4. Next, to start tracking transactions, you'll need what's called a data layer, which is essentially where the e-commerce platform automatically sends information formatted in a way that can be easily read and understood by Google Tag Manager and allows us to track things. For example, when people purchase, we want to track not just that somebody got to the order confirmation page, we want to see what products they bought and how much they spent. And that information typically comes from a data layer. I will say that most e-commerce platforms that we encounter in our work and in our sector do already have a data layer that provides information on purchase behavior. Finally, you'll want to take some time to consider your data requirements and defining what data you need and want to collect. We want to be intentional about the data we're collecting on our website and not just rely on Google's automatic events. We have custom websites with custom content, and migrating to GA4 provides a great opportunity to think about what behavior is truly important. In the next few sections, I'll get into some of the technical specifics on each of these things, and I'll have a flag on each slide to denote which phase we think it should be a part of. So let's start with e-commerce. We want to be sure we're sending e-commerce data into GA4 so we can associate campaigns and website behavior with transactions. And getting this set up should definitely be a part of phase 1. I will say this was slightly more straightforward and universal. We would just create a transaction tag, a type of tag that was pre-formatted for us in Google Tag Manager, and have it fire on the order confirmation page. And in most cases where your e-commerce platform has a properly formatted data layer, that would be it. That would be all we needed to do. You can see the Universal Analytics example on the left. For GA4, there are a couple of additional steps we have to take. So as I mentioned earlier, everything in GA4 is an event. So we have to create a GA4 event tag in Google Analytics, call it purchase, and then send with that parameters or additional information about that purchase formatted in a specific way. So to do that, we need to understand how our data layer is sending information on our transactions in order to map those variables to the proper parameters that GA4 is expecting for a purchase event. That process is documented by Google, but it does become slightly more complicated if your e-commerce platform formats that data slightly differently, or if it doesn't have one to begin with. And while I'll say it's fairly standard and best practice in the e-commerce world these days to have a data layer, unfortunately, I've seen both of these things happen. So purchase tracking will require a few more steps than Universal, but if you're familiar with Google Tag Manager and you have a data layer, it can be pretty straightforward. Where things get a bit more advanced is in sending information on the steps that lead up to purchase. So viewing a particular product detail page or adding it to the cart. The default e-commerce report in GA4 looks like this when you're able to properly send view item and add to cart events in addition to purchase. So here you'll see the name of the show or the product, the number of times that item has been viewed, the number of times it's been added to the cart, and then the number of times it's been purchased. And we'll also then be able to calculate the ratio of those things. So we can start to see conversion rates across our purchase path. And this is really valuable data to be able to understand which shows are resonating. However, sending this information can be a bit more technical since it's more rare for the e-commerce platforms used by our sector to provide a data layer on these steps. So setting this up often requires customization and some code in Google Tag Manager. This is a really cool report, but it's certainly less critical than tracking transactions themselves. So we think this should be a part of phase 2. Before I move on, I will say that at Capacity Interactive, we have years of experience with the e-commerce platforms used by our sector. And if you'd like to have a more personalized conversation about how to tackle either the basic or advanced e-commerce setup, I definitely encourage you to sign up for one of our team's free 30-minute assessments, and we'll share that link in the chat. Let's move on to PII, or personally identifiable information. It's important to note that the purpose of Google Analytics is to collect anonymous behavioral data. We are required to ensure that we aren't capturing anything that could identify an individual person or user. So that's email address, name, phone number, or other kinds of sensitive information. Google does not care if you're doing this on purpose or by accident. They reserve the right to delete accounts that collect any PII. In practice, I haven't seen that ever happen, but we do want to be good stewards of the internet. I think we can all agree, and we want to do our best to avoid that. The most common way we see PII rear its ugly head is in something like this. So you can see here that when Yosef logged into his account, his email was captured in the URL. And then that URL and PII and all gets sent to Google Analytics, unless we do some work to redact that information. The best way to do that, and how CI has tackled this for years, is using some of the advanced features and code in Google Tag Manager to redact that information before it gets sent to analytics. And the solution for GA4 is pretty similar. As I mentioned, taking this step is required by Google. It's also just the right thing to do to be an ethical user of the internet and Google Analytics. I would suggest you check your data in Universal, see if you've been capturing any PII, and then you'll want to make sure you redact that information going forward and make that a part of your phase 1 implementation for GA4 as well. Kind of an interesting side note, there are some interesting possibilities with sending a user ID to GA4 as someone logs into their account on your site. Google does not consider this kind of information to be PII. However, it's definitely worth checking internally to be sure that aligns with your own privacy policy. What this can do if we send the user ID to GA4 is Google can use that information just like it does the knowledge of users logged into their Google account to connect the dots between browsing across devices. Just as an example, you can see in this screenshot, once Yosef logged into his account, his user ID is available in the data layer. So then we can send that to GA4 if it aligns with our policies. I would definitely reserve this for phase 2. The last 2 items I'll cover around the technical pieces of a GA4 implementation are definitely a part of phase 2. They're cool, they give us much richer and more interesting data, but they're not critical. First up, thinking about custom user behaviors. This is where you can get creative and find solutions to track the interactions that are most meaningful for your organization. As I mentioned earlier, we have custom websites with custom functionality. We spend a lot of money and time designing our site and determining what content we'll share and how. And we want to go beyond what Google provides out of the box to measure that properly. Otherwise, we're not going to know how people are using those features that we really agonized over. So this can include things like non-YouTube video plays. I mentioned that YouTube was tracked automatically because it's a Google product, but I know that Vimeo is used by a lot of organizations, and that is not. You could also build out tracking around how somebody is interacting with the site navigation features, opening your mobile nav, for example, how someone is scrolling or swiping through image galleries, whether they're clicking specific modules on pages like the hero, whether people are using anchor links or accordions or tabs or any other kinds of features that you have on your site. The possibilities are endless. All of this can provide really valuable information about how the design of your site is actually performing and how users are actually interacting with the content you're providing. Tracking all of this behavior can be done using Google Tag Manager. Also, since GA4 allows us to send up to 25 different parameters or data points with each event, there's a lot that we can do to customize what we're tracking with these kinds of interactions. I would say that configuring these events definitely requires a strategic approach and often can also require some code in Google Tag Manager. And finally, let's talk about content groupings. This is a CI favorite feature. We often have hundreds or thousands of pages on our site, and it can be really overwhelming to understand what content users are looking for and what's resonating. You can see in this example that there are nearly 17,000 pages in this page report, which, like, where do you even start with that? Content groupings can then help aggregate your page data into categories by section of the site or by template, and thereby make that data, I think, much more useful and allow for some really interesting analyses like the one I showed at the beginning with the popularity of various sections. It used to be fairly easy to create content groupings from the admin interface of Universal Analytics, and it's honestly super frustrating that this is no longer possible with GA4. The screenshot here is from the Universal interface. But because we love this type of analysis so much for our clients, we've created a solution where we use code in Google Tag Manager to dynamically categorize pages and send our content groupings to GA4. So now you've implemented GA4, you've started collecting data. Let's talk a little bit about how you access that data. Unfortunately, GA4's reporting interface makes this pretty challenging. And real talk, I have found the interface pretty challenging to get used to myself. I take some comfort in the fact that others in the analytics community feel the same way. But as I mentioned before, Google only provides about a dozen reports out of the box in GA4 compared to almost 100 in Universal. Instead, GA4 offers a section called Explorations that allows each user to build out custom reports and visualizations. Google also provides a number of templates that can give you some ideas about what might be interesting. This level of customization, of course, has pros and cons. It's great, but it also means it's more work for us to access the data and create the reports that we need and that we're used to seeing. At CI, we have felt for some time that Google's data visualization platform, Data Studio, can often offer a more user-friendly interface for accessing the data we want. And I think in many cases, using Data Studio may be easier and more accessible than Explorations. Before you start building out any kind of reports, either in Explorations or in Data Studio, it's important to take the time to define what your key performance indicators will be. This is the process of taking a step back and asking the big questions. Why do we have a website in the first place? What are our objectives? And then what data do we have that can help us understand how our site is performing and whether we're being successful? This slide just shows some examples of what we mean by KPIs. It's not meant to be prescriptive, so I'm not going to read through all of them. But in going through this process, it will help you get familiar with the data that's available in GA4. As I mentioned, the data model is changing and has some different metrics than you may be used to seeing. One of those, the metrics that has been a KPI for us in the past is bounce rate. So this will tell us kind of how people are engaging with the site. In GA4, that is replaced with the concept of engagement rate. It's essentially the same thing, but it's measured and calculated slightly differently. But so going through this process of determining your KPIs will help you then determine what you need to build dashboards for, but also can help you start to think about what you might want to customize as you begin to implement additional tracking in phase 2. Finally, once you've narrowed in on your KPIs, we would recommend building a dashboard. So this will help you focus on the performance of those most important metrics. The screenshot here is a sample dashboard we built for a client using Google Data Studio. Again, we like Data Studio as it's a way to access the data. It allows us to focus on the most meaningful metrics to us, visualize it in a nice way, and then automate that dashboard to be regularly delivered to our inbox. That allows us to spend our time really on insights rather than digging for the metrics that we want. We can observe the changes in our dashboard and spend our energy filling in the how and the why and the narrative that gives those observations meaning. One example of a report that we've created as we've started to get used to GA4 is this kind of side-by-side that compares basic metrics in Universal to GA4. We expect that there will be some differences in the data for technical reasons and differences in Google's methodology. And this kind of dashboard can help us get a sense of what to expect and help us to set new benchmarks for ourselves. Beyond that, we would recommend creating multiple dashboards to make it easy for you to access the data that is meaningful. This could be content performance, e-commerce, campaign performance, the list goes on. Each organization's site and goals are unique, so this list should really vary. So to wrap things up and summarize a bit, tackling GA4 is a big undertaking, from the technical setup to understanding and using the data. You'll definitely need someone to help spearhead and champion this project within your organization. Not just to start capturing the data, but to then also facilitate and make sure that you're using it to inform decisions, as Yosef talked about in the previous session. And with that, it's important to start by setting expectations, both for yourself and for your organization. So these will be our GA4 adoption mantras. First off, just acknowledging that it will be challenging from a technical standpoint, and we are accepting it. Knowing that it will take time to get comfortable with the GA4 data and interface. And it'll also take time to bring others in your organization along as well. Since we know this will be a process, we think it's best to tackle it in phases. So knowing then that going into it, not everything will be set up at once. We also know that Google is continuing to roll out new features, so the platform itself will continue to evolve and change. Because the platform is new and remains in flux, there may be some bugs that need to be worked out, either on Google's side or in our implementation. So things may not be perfect out of the gate. And finally, as we've shown, taking advantage of some of the more advanced features may require more technical expertise, and you may need some help. Again, if you'd like to talk with us about the specifics of your organization's GA4 journey, I would encourage you to sign up for one of our 30-minute assessments, and we'll put the link in the chat once more for that. So all of these technical pieces and platform-specific pieces, GA4, Universal, all of that aside, and maybe also putting aside any feelings of being overwhelmed that you may have from how much I said this may be technical. More than anything, what I hope you get out of this is a sense of possibility. And if you're jazzed about the possibilities of understanding your website performance, know that you can be the advocate for using that data at your organization. Being data-driven is really about asking questions and facilitating data-driven conversations, asking for the data and encouraging others to do the same. So that can look like asking your colleagues what data they're most curious about, having a conversation about what data will best demonstrate the impact of a certain initiative, or in really any kind of conversation, being the one to interject. Did you know that we have data available for that? Or asking the question, what data do we have for that? And then finally, once you're familiar with GA4 and you know the website data that's available to you there, you can make sure that that data is used to inform decisions around the website, from the simplest content update to full redesigns. I think the most important thing here is just to be curious. Not only are our websites a critical part of our audience experience, from being our point of sale to the destination for campaigns, to the first impression we give new audiences. Our websites are really a treasure trove of information that can help us better serve our audiences and our mission. Regardless of platform, being data-driven and being audience-centric are really one and the same. So we don't have a Q&A today, but I think my colleagues have been responding to questions in the chat. Please don't hesitate to DM me in the conference platform or shoot me an email with any questions as well. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you have a great rest of boot camp. Be well, everyone.
My name is Nick Rama. My pronouns are he, him. I'm coming to you from Manhattan, which is the home of the Lenape tribe of indigenous people. For our last session together, we'll be practicing a technique called metta, also known as loving kindness. This technique is very beneficial for developing empathy. Empathy is a key skill that we've all developed, we have been developing. It's always been important, but the events of the last year that we're still going through has really brought that awareness of how important empathy is in our lives and the lives of others. And this practice is very beneficial for developing that sense of empathy. I also just want to acknowledge that, again, these practices may not work for everyone. They may not be beneficial, or they may bring up hard feelings for you, and that's okay. So I just want to acknowledge that it's completely voluntary to engage in this practice. It is a visualization practice, so what we'll be doing is visualizing groups of people and sending them empathy and loving kindness. And we'll start with someone that's easy to love, then we'll move on to someone who's neutral, and then we'll move to a difficult person. So acknowledging that this can bring up difficult feelings, and if that does, that's totally okay. So I just want to acknowledge that. So with that, I'd invite you to take a seat, whatever's comfortable for you. Either sitting down on the ground, lying down on the ground, sitting in a chair. And again, we'll start by just taking a deep breath in together, collective breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Again, taking one more deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And if it's comfortable for you, I'd invite you to close your eyes. Really drop in to your body. So again, we'll just take a quick moment of mindfulness to just connect mindfully with the body, mindfully with the breath, just dropping whatever came before this, whatever's coming up after this. Just trying to commit to the session and to bring that sense of presence and that intention to our time together. And again, as I mentioned, this practice is a visualization practice. So I'd invite you now to visualize someone who's very easy for you to love. So that could be a friend, a family member. A lot of times I use babies or pets. It's very unconditional, very easy to love them. So whatever that person or being is, visualize them in your mind. And we're going to be saying and giving them the following phrases of love and of kindness. May you be happy. May you be happy. So either saying those phrases out loud or saying them in your mind, communicating it to this image that you have of this person, this being. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be healthy. And may you be at peace. May you be at peace. Now, I invite us to place this image down and to pick up another image. Pick up an image of a neutral person. This could be a person that you saw on the street, at your local coffee shop, on your commute to work, or working from home, maybe a delivery person, someone that you know but you don't quite know this person, at least you don't know them well. And again, we'll send them the same phrases, the following phrases. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be healthy. And may you be at peace. May you be at peace. So just taking a moment, sending those phrases of love and kindness to this neutral person. Now I'd invite you to place this neutral person down and to now imagine someone who may be a difficult person for you. This doesn't have to be the most difficult person. It could be just a person that you have a minor annoyance with, but someone who's bringing up feelings of difficulty. You might not get along with this person. It's often happened for me with some coworkers or bosses. And just recognizing that they're human as well as you, and they still want to feel love and kindness and peace. So we'll send this difficult person the same phrases. May you be happy. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be healthy. And may you be at peace. May you be at peace. So visualizing this difficult person and sending them these phrases of love and of kindness. And now I'd invite you to place this difficult person, this visualization down, and I actually invite you to bring up everyone, bring up the image of the person or the being that you felt easy to love, bring in that image of the neutral person, and bring in that image of a difficult person or being. And imagine you standing with all these people, these beings, all together in a circle. It could be kind of a funny image to think about, all these people together. And just collectively, like, feel like you're holding hands with everyone in a circle, and you're thinking about, you know, the place you're in, the city that you're in. So for myself, I'm in New York City, so just imagining Manhattan, imagining going out to Brooklyn, imagining all the boroughs. So just like that, wherever you are, imagine just expanding out from your city to your state, to the entire country, to the entire world, even above land and below, even the beings that are below in the water. And send all these beings, all these people, the following phrases. May we all be happy. May we all be happy. May we all be healthy. May we all be healthy. And may we all be at peace. May we all be at peace. So just taking a moment to radiate these feelings of love and kindness throughout everyone, sending these out like a beam of light from within yourself to all corners, to all aspects. Just radiating that out to the entire world, visualizing yourself doing that. Then I'd invite us to just bring back that energy, bring that energy back into your body, and just really feel that sense of love and of kindness within your body. Just feeling what that felt like, that journey that we just went through together. How do you feel? And whatever's coming up from you, if it's positive, it's neutral, if it's maybe uncomfortable, just tapping into what's going on for you. With that, I'd invite you to open your eyes and come back to your surroundings, and just again, taking a moment to give gratitude to yourself for engaging in this practice. It's not always easy to do this practice, so I do want to acknowledge that and thank you for your efforts. And again, I would like to give thanks to the organizers of this conference, and thanks to all of you for participating and for our time together. And I'm sending you all feelings of love and of kindness, and I wish you all the best, and take care. Bye.